Good morning. God bless you in the wonderful name of our living Lord and advocate Savior, Jesus Christ. We continue in our relentless stride athletically and spiritually through these magnificent records in the great revelation of Genesis. Genesis 42 is where we will pick up after a few basic introductory remarks here. Holding your place in Genesis 42, I'd like you to go to Isaiah 58 and take a look at a section that I think really sets the standard for what we are observing in the life of this man of God, Joseph, as he has worked through so many challenging scenarios that he may carry out God's primary will and have an impact on the entire world, not only then, but even to our day and time. It's the reason we're called the remnant of Joseph. The reason his father, Jacob, renamed Israel, made for him a coat of many colors, it was to designate that he was chosen as the prince of his patriarchy. That even though at the time he was the youngest son, eventually the next to the youngest son, even at the time he was the next to the youngest, Benjamin being the youngest, being a child, that even at 17 years old, Joseph had been selected to be the head of the whole family. That's what the coat of many colors meant by Jacob, or Israel's spiritual assessment, which was right on. And we are called the remnant of Joseph. He was the highest caliber of spiritual man among the 12 sons of Israel. Others had qualities emerge in their progeny, even in their own lives from time to time, which we see, but they also had a lot of treachery in them. They were moved with envy. Even the great man of God, Stephen, put it that way in his confrontation of the Sanhedrin in Acts chapter 7. He said the patriarchs moved with envy, and that was the truth, of course, in which they considered murdering out of jealousy and envy the 17-year-old young man Joseph, but restrained themselves. Judah restrained them, Reuben also, which at least speaks a little bit to their credit at the time, that they weren't overwhelmed by a murder spirit, and said they'd just sell him into slavery. Well, we know the father, in his foreknowledge, had his plan set in motion to rescue the Christ line, to rescue the patriarchy of Jacob, or Israel, from the great famine that the adversary was bringing to the world, which without the stand of Joseph, you can only think that it would have killed out the Christ line. God does not violate free will. He is just in that. You can't ever find a place, even if you have a bad translation or you misunderstand the context, you can never find a place where Jehovah Elohim, the true God, who created the heavens and the earth, ever violates any man or woman or young person's free will. And that's why as we move into the Genesis record, we get involved in this incredible scenario of Joseph dealing with his brothers and all the back and forth, the sending them back and the restoring their money into their bags without them knowing it, and then later them coming back and him demanding that they bring the youngest son, his brother, out of Rachel, Benjamin, with them. And all the back and forth, even as they left after that, he hid his own silver chalice in Benjamin's bag so they could be accused of stealing. Sense knowledge evaluators say that Joseph was playing games with them. He was jerking them around because of his anger and desire for vengeance for them selling him into slavery. And that, of course, is a misnomer, like they always do when they try to interpret the word from a census point of view. I don't doubt that Joseph had anger. I don't think you would fault him for that. There's a thing called spiritual vengeance that I talked about a few weeks ago in these Harvest in the Gloaming presentations from 2 Corinthians 7:11. But the heart of the vengeance is against the spiritual adversary. But when people carry these poison spirits and carry these manipulative devils, it's a real intriguing scenario, this whole category of forgiving and being forgiven. It's maybe not as simplistic as sometimes the slothful want to think. Sometimes it is quick because people's hearts have come full go in their honesty before God to be true and not harbor alibi and rationalization. But sometimes it takes a whole series of events being put together, confrontations. Remember, the word says, by their fruits ye shall know them. And this record shows us a man of God, Joseph, carefully walking by revelation. And if there's a section that ever bears out Dr. Orville's great line, every truth must fit in the framework of the manifestations, it is this. You cannot properly divide these chapters of Genesis on Joseph's dealing with his earthly family without recognizing the revelation involved in these sometimes very intriguing decisions that Joseph made about how he dealt with them, why he waited so long before he revealed himself, even when you can see emotionally he wanted to. Revelation, word of wisdom, word of knowledge, discerning of spirits. You see, God is the searcher of hearts, not you, not me. And it's his perceptions and awareness that help us in difficult situations as such, not only on being the one who's been sinned against and must forgive if conditions are fulfilled, or the ones that have done the hurt and have to get their hearts right before authentic forgiveness can go into energized operation. This is one of the great records of all time, and they've misunderstood it. They've even ignored this whole back and forth with his brothers because they don't know how to put it together and understand it. And we are doing our best, and I believe we can put it together like it hasn't been in a long, long time. It's a record of forgiveness. It's learning from the point of the one that requires forgiveness and the one desiring to give that forgiveness. People would say, why didn't he just make himself known right away? Revelation. He was to hold it within himself. God, the searcher of hearts, knew it was going to take a series of events for Judah and the rest to get their hearts ready to admit their sin, their error, doctrinally and practically, if you please, in selling their brother in slavery and covering it up for over 20 years. Joseph was 17 when they sold him into slavery. 13 years later, at the age of 30, he was elevated to second in command over the empire of Egypt because he, by revelation, interpreted Pharaoh's dreams or visions. Then there were 7 years of plenty, and then, as I believe, up to into the second year of famine before Jacob, Israel, sent his sons because he had heard there was corn in Egypt. So now you've got perhaps 9 years plus, 17 to 30 and 9 more years. So Joseph is 39 to 40 years old dealing with them. He is in the apex of his spiritual depth and perception. He's had nearly 10 years in this responsible position over Egypt, besides everything he proved of himself in the household of Potiphar and in the prison when he proved himself the highest of caliber as a steward. So he is walking at the apex of his spiritual depth and perception and awareness. And it's just revelation. word of wisdom, word of knowledge, how far he could take it each time before he finally had the green light to reveal himself. Wow. You know, I was reading a book early this morning about a movie director, and he's talking about his field of making film, and I thought what he says here in this short paragraph fit ideally with what any good teacher is endeavoring to do also, as I endeavor to teach this word. By the way, it's the 6th of January. Did I say that? 2024. See, I got the year right. But here's what he said. Stories have to be uniquely familiar. Like this Genesis record, most people have heard, even secular, have heard of the record of Joseph and Egypt and the brothers and the back and forth. It's sort of embedded in the culture. Always not accurate, but of course through Bible schools and Sunday school and even films that have been made, even secular books that have been written with this as a base storyline. So he says stories have to be uniquely familiar. There's got to be something that is still accessible. And at the same time, he goes on, it's got to feel as if you've never quite seen something like this before. Now, there's the great art of teaching. That's my added comment. Now, back to his paragraph. If you get that balance right, where he says there's got to be something uniquely familiar that the audience can connect to, and yet then able to show them something they've never seen before. He goes on to say, if you get that balance right, then you might have a film. Well, you sure have a teaching of the Word. And that's what we've been doing and will believe God to continue to do. You see, in Isaiah 58, I think this is a magnificent chapter on the true fast, a genuine, authentic spiritual fast, and we pick it up in verse 8. Well, we better start in verse 6. Is not this the fast that I have chosen? Question. To loose the bands of wickedness. See, why is it called a fast? Because to really bring deliverance to people, to loose the bands of the spirit realm in people's lives, you have to give up other things. That's the fast. You can't be all deeply involved in cultural activity or even pleasure or hobbies at the expense of your concentrated time in the Word. Sure, you can have some. That's always the balancing act. What of your hobbies and what of our involvements in the culture give us just the right amount of relaxation, for instance, or learning, yes, learning, like in reading, etc., that contribute to my ability to put the Word together and loose the bands of wickedness. This is a personal decision that we all make by the hour sometimes. A fast is a giving up of something for a greater purpose. Dr. Earl called it for the work of the ministry. That's a true fast. Got nothing to do with whether you eat or drink, although it could involve that. Yes, in proper proportion. But the religious world has made it into some kind of eat and drink, body, soul, giving up of some activity to make yourself feel holy. It's not it at all. It's a walk by the Spirit. What do I need to give up to make sure I'm doing my utmost for His highest to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens? That takes discipline. That takes persistence. That's why the Joseph record is the perfect illustration of what this is saying in Isaiah 58. To undo the heavy burdens. How about famine? That's a pretty heavy burden. And to let the oppressed go free. How about the guilt that these brothers had harbored? And that'll emerge. The guilt they had harbored for nearly 20 years, over 20 years, before by Joseph's masterful confrontation, arrangement of scenarios, by observing their behavior. For instance, when they brought Benjamin back finally on their second or third trip back to him, he put Benjamin in the favored seat. He rewarded Benjamin with 5 times the provisions than the others. And then he observed, were they moved with envy like they were against him? And by that time he saw their hearts were good, and he saw the time was approaching when he could truly unveil himself to them, show who he was, and believe that they truly had come to a humility required. Essentially, those brothers were out of fellowship with God for nearly 23 years, at least. From the time he was 17 till almost 40, if not 40 years old, they harbored this secret. There's no record that they ever revealed it to their father. Their father still thinks Joseph was killed by wild beasts, and that's reflected in things he said in those latter days, in wrestling with the decision whether to send Benjamin with them. So they not only had performed this heinous act, moved with envy and jealousy, but they had harbored it, hidden it. And I'll show you as we get to it, you can see indications of guilt. Because when Joseph restored all their money in their bags, if they hadn't been full of guilt and fear, they would have rejoiced. Instead, they freaked. One of them even said, "Why has God done this to us?" Accusing God. They thought they would be executed. They were terrified. Guilt does that. When God restores blessings and then your knee-jerk reaction is to somehow be terrified of it, afraid of it, not recognizing the true spiritual source, that's a true indication of guilt that has been gone unresolved. This record is unbelievable through here, and I don't know of anyone that's ever put it together like I'm going to show you and am showing you. To undo the heavy burdens and to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke. Now that requires fasting in a spiritual sense. There's only so many hours in a day. There's some things, and the key here is that it's not a negative thing. If you notice religious fast, most people walk around acting the part, acting all burdened down, all hungry and sallow, and rejoicing in how bad they feel. What a bunch of baloney. It's all arrogance and ego. A genuine fast, you don't know what I've given up in my life to make this word my life. A few things maybe, but you don't know, because I don't walk around talking about what I've given up unless it illustrates the truth. Same with your life. What have you forsaken and given up that the world dangled in front of your eyes, but you turned aside from it for the sake of loosing the bands of wickedness, undoing the heavy burdens, letting the oppressed go free, and breaking every spiritual yoke? You can't do it all. You can't serve God and mammon, riches and the will of God. Jesus Christ taught that. Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, spiritually and physically? And that thou bring poor is humble. Bring the humble that are cast out to thy house. That means the faithful saints in Christ, what we'd call the true heart remnant of Joseph in our day. Bring them to a household again. When thou seest the naked, which means vulnerabilities. When you observe people's vulnerabilities in body and soul, that thou cover him, that your prayers, your intercessions, your standing in the gap covers until they get strong enough to stand and walk on their own. And that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh, referring to fellow believers. We're talking spiritually here. Then That's the true fast. That's the commitment of an authentic fast. You see, verse 5 says, is it such a fast that I have chosen, a day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head as a bulrush, and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Wilt thou call this a fast and an acceptable day to the Lord? See, all that sense knowledge religious crap is a waste of time, waste of God's time and theirs, and just drives them deeper out of alignment and harmony. Verse 8, then, when those commitments are made and those results you see in your life and ministry, then shall thy light break forth as the morning. Now, obviously, I'm going to need light as the morning to loose the bands and undo the burdens and let the oppressed go free. Yes, definitely. You got to have that kind of revelation to do that for people. You got to have that kind of revelation on His Word, His written Word, and in the manifestations. But, God can't say everything at once, so He unveils what's going on in the process of an authentic spiritual fast, which Joseph is one of the great illustrations of all time. Then shall thy light break forth as the morning, and thine health or wholeness shall spring forth speedily. See, your healings, your deliverances in body and soul, in emotion, in physical realm, in finances, in sustenance, will come speedily when you are salted to the true spiritual fast of carrying out the work of our ministry of the remnant of Joseph in our day and time. Health shall spring forth quickly, speedily, and thy righteousness shall go before thee, and the glory of Jehovah shall be thy reward. Righteousness in front, glory behind you, I'd say we're covered. You talk about a cloud and a smoke by day and the shining of a flame of fire by night. You talk about clothed, endued with Spirit, power from on high. Then shalt thou call, and the Lord shall answer. See, this is all in the processes. He'll answer your prayers of true, honest love, worship, and heart to help God's people and others. Because remember, Galatians says, do good unto all, as much as possible, agathos, but especially unto the household of the faith, which means the remnant of Joseph in our day. Then shalt thou call, and the Lord shall answer. Most Christians you talk about by this time in their lives just joke about how they can't trust prayer. Oh, they do it, but they rarely see anything specific happen because they ask amiss, because they do not pray perfectly, because they do not pray for things that they do not understand what they should pray for as they ought, because they refuse to renew their minds to the command, I passionately desire that you all speak with tongues, Paul said in 1 Corinthians 14:5. Passionately desire. And he's speaking for the Father, that you all speak continually in the text, continually in tongues. So they ignore that. They disobey. And they've been out of alignment and harmony ever since they turned their back on such a revelation. Like these brothers, these 10 older brothers have been out of fellowship since even before they sent Joseph into slavery, because they had to sow the seed of their envy and their jealousy even before the crossroads of those bad decisions came to pass. But once they finally get humble, and it didn't happen with the snap of a finger, once they finally get humble, it indicates to me as I read this record, I'm not even sure they ever even wondered what happened to Joseph. And his father was so convinced that they had told him the truth because he never believed his sons would collectively lie to him. And to maintain that story for over 20 years, he never even inquired whether maybe Joseph somehow survived and escaped. They didn't even care to inquire, did they? Wrapped up in their own baloney, wrapped up in their own arrogance, wrapped up in their own wealth and stupid decisions. It's what people do. Waste away their lives thinking they're righteous when they're not. My goodness gracious, what a clarion call. Then shalt thou call, and the Lord shall answer. Thou shalt cry, and he shall say, Here I am. The true God, Jehovah Elohim, answering that intimately and personally. If you have that heart of salted fasting. If thou take away from the midst of thee the yoke. So many just put more burdens on people. Become a walking, talking, blithering, slobbering stumbling block. And that's a yoke on people. Legalists, Pharisees in disguise, wolves in sheep's clothing that rip the flock apart. Paul warned them of in Acts 20. The putting forth of the finger, always accusing, accusing, accusing. And there's Dr. Earl's great story. Every time you point a finger at somebody, you got three pointing back at yourself. That's certainly true in this category. The opposite of the true fast. And yet these are the real ultra-religious, like the Pharisees. And speaking vanity. Vanity is vacuous, empty, venal. It's empty. It's void of nourishment. Vanity. It's false doctrine. Bad advice in the guise of good advice. Goes on to say, see, he's telling us what it is not and what it is as a true fast, which Joseph illustrates. And if thou draw out thy soul to the hungry, see, draw out, reach out. It's a reaching out. If I'm concentrated on reaching out my soul, which is everything I am, my personality, my aptitudes, my acumen, my wisdom, my knowledge, my understanding, my experiences, my emotions. If I'm pouring out my soul, that's all of that. To those that hunger and thirst after righteousness. Well, that means I've had to eliminate some frivolity in my life. I've even had to eliminate some things that at times I was very serious about, that I prioritized in my life, but I've had to lay it aside. That's the fast. And the key is when you're really in the light of the Spirit of God working in you, you really don't lament what you're giving away. In these religious fasts, all they do is lament it because they want to have the attention. All they do is lament. They can't wait to get back into gouging themselves on whatever they gave up for a week or some other dumbass religious malarkey that means nothing. They can't wait to chow down spiritually, emotionally, physically on what they gave up for a few days. That's not, when it's an authentic fast, there might have been a few ticks and a few shakes when you first started, but if you really go full resolve, fully persuaded on this word, and it dwells in us richly, and you stay fully persuaded, you get more fully persuaded. You reach for that rock that is higher than you day by day. You don't lament what you've given up. You rejoice in what you're gaining as you draw out your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul. Though what you promise to the hungry, you come through. You come through. They're not disappointed in their expectations. Matter of fact, they get exceeding abundantly above all they ask or think. Like so many of you tell me about these remnant adventures in the Word, that it goes even beyond the highest of your expectations in what you want to learn and understand to be able to apply in your life. That's right. That's the authentic. Satisfy the afflicted soul. Then shall thy light rise in obscurity. I love that. Enter into the rock, hide in the dust, for the respect of the Lord and the glory of his majesty. That was my byword for 25 years in Isaiah 2:10. Some ways it still is, despite all the teaching we've done in the last 6 or 7 years. In some ways it still is, the great Isaiah 2, verse 10. But that light shall rise in obscurity. You don't need the world's attention. You don't need what the world calls fame and acclaim and riches and all their fickle praise. Because ours is from the Father and from the faithful, the saints and faithful, that respond to what we draw out of ourselves to satisfy the afflicted, the hungry. Thy light rise in obscurity, and thy darkness be as the noonday. That's right. What a great figure of speech. What a great oxymoron. Hyperbole. I think it fits both definitions. Thy darkness be as the noonday means you're walking in the brightness. Even in the murkiest days, you got the brightness of his word gelling deeply within. Now verse 11. Think of Joseph as we read this one especially. And the Lord shall guide thee continually. Dr. Will taught us the difference between the words in English, continuously, which means constant, perpetual. The word continually, without the S, means at the right and proper times and occasions. Just when I need it. The Lord shall guide thee continually. He doesn't talk to us constantly. He's working in us to will and to do as we speak in tongues and move through a day. But continually is especially in light of the word of wisdom, word of knowledge, and discerning of spirits that you see reading how Joseph dealt with this incredibly delicate situation with his 10 elder brothers who still had not come to a humility of heart that they could be forgiven for that heinous, treacherous act that they performed, and all the decisions he made on hiding his identity, on confronting them, speaking roughly to them, threatening them with consequence if they didn't do what he said, and then feasting them and honoring them and giving them more provisions than he gave anyone else as he sent them home, and then seeing their reaction to it, fear and guilt and anger at God. That was all telling him things until finally he had the green light and God could tell him, and only God would know. Finally, they showed enough fruit of humility, and he spiritually was allowed of the Father to reveal his identity to them. And we see one of the great records you can ever observe. The only thing that could stand above it that I can think of is how Jesus dealt with Peter and Judas in the wake of their incredible treasons. Of course, by treason, all the apostles ran. Peter most spectacularly, because he denied the Lord before the people that confronted him 6 times, not 3, like the religious morons have taught for centuries. 6 denials of Peter, 6 the human number. Dr. Orwell teaches that in Jesus Christ our Passover. 6 denials, 3 totally wrong number. All you do is take the commas out of that great verse in Mark, before the cock crows twice thou shalt deny me thrice. 2 times 3, 6. See, they leave the commas in and wrongly divide the word for centuries. Little comma taken out, before the cock crows twice thou shalt deny me thrice. Well, what's 2 times 3? Yeah, you got it. Stupid, stupid, stupid. To this day, they don't want to learn. See, that's not who I don't give a hoot about them. I care about those who hunger. Those are the afflicted I want to work at satisfying. The Lord shall guide thee continually and satisfy thy soul. How? In drought. Well, even the physical drought. They were into the 7 years of famine when his brothers came seeking help. Talk about the decisions he was responsible for day by day, as hundreds of thousands, even millions, came to him and his people that helped him to get sustenance when there was no corn left being harvested. only that which was in storage, and he's overseeing all that, and at the same time dealing with these hard-hearted, hard-headed brothers. And whether he sensed it, I'm sure he sensed something. He knew God needed his family to be spared. And later, as Jacob utters that great revelation over Judah before he dies in Genesis 49, we see that through Judah, the prince shall come, the great Messiah will come through the bloodline of Judah. Wow. Look how hard God had to work without violating free will to make sure the author of death didn't kill out the Christ line. So much in here. And Joseph was his agent. Joseph was his man standing in the gap. We are the remnant of Joseph. Shall guide thee continually. And the drought also was a spiritual drought. Joseph had no mature spiritual men or women around him. He's alone in that pagan nation. Now, he had good-hearted people, like the Pharaoh was a unique one, who was willing to see Joseph's greatness, a man in whom the Spirit of God is. I'm sure his wife must have been an asset. It doesn't say anything more about her, but she was raised in the polytheistic, idolatry-worshiping culture. She was the daughter of a priest. He did have two wonderful sons that I'm sure were a comfort to him, Ephraim and Manasseh, but you couldn't call them spiritually mature in that day. They were teenagers probably, if not younger. A lot of chronology in here. Sometimes you just have to make your best estimate. Sometimes it's specific. Like knowing Joseph was 17, it tells us that in Genesis 37, and that he was 30 years old when he came before Pharaoh and was put in second in command. So those give you a great framework there. But he was in a spiritual drought. These 10 brothers, or 11, should have been his spiritual support system. But he's standing up, essentially him and the father, dealing with these responsibilities to save the civilized world from total wipeout. And he's dealing with this situation. And make fat thy bones. That's referring to the marrow of the bones. Thy bones shall flourish as an herb, Isaiah 66, I think it's verse 14 says. Thy bones, your spiritual infrastructure, shall flourish as an herb. Marrow, physically, is where new cells are made. You might even say created, I guess, but made. New cells in the blood are made in the marrow of the bone. That, to me, is a direct figurative relationship, metaphorically, if not allegorically, to speaking in tongues. Because speaking in tongues edifies, strengthens, builds you up, invigorates, quickens. So you look at this spiritually and your mind can hardly keep up with it. And, all separated by and. Each of these important to consider all through here. Polysyndeton. And thou shalt be. Now watch these great similes. Like a watered garden. Isn't that a picture of lushness, of prosperity, of abundance in the midst of the drought in which we have found ourselves spiritually and physically at times? And like a spring of water. That's like the fountain of living water. An Elysian, or they got a word for that, I forgot. Elysian spring, there's another word for it. A spring that runs perpetually, fresh, cool water. We had them all over the Way International grounds. We had them all over that Rome City grounds. We had that beautiful Gunnison River running through our Camp Gunnison property, all representative of these great water metaphors, whose waters fail not. And the center margin is great on fail not. They don't lie, they don't deceive. There's an aggregate of Moab representing the old nature called Medeba that specifically, by definition, speaks to poisoned waters. Waters loaded with the venom of poison of the adversary's realm. That we must renounce to move forward in our lives. And they that shall be of thee, all these calibers and qualities of life, shall build the old waste places. We have built the waste places. How much of the Word have I rebuilt in your mind over these years or months, some of you just a few weeks or days even? How much of the Word have I restored to you? Just in maybe some of you, the few hours you have listened. Some of these new folks that have come in the last few months, they have devoured every tape I've done, over 250 or so, and they are quickly working their way through all. Now that's hungering and thirsting after righteousness. That's the remnant. That's searching the Scriptures daily, whether these things are so, Acts 17:11. And I know you that have been with me for a few years have done the same. How much of the Word have you had restored that you'd forgotten about? Or maybe not even forgotten. If you're honest, you'd forgotten about it. And maybe if you're even more honest, even what you thought you held on to had deteriorated, had holes in it, worms in it, breaks of logic. And certainly your salted commitment to many of these promises had waxed feeble, where the light of God was about to be blown out, until you started hearing the right divided truth to build the old waste places. Thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations. That's what a true teacher does. Doctoral taught us that when you rightly divide the Word, there's no contradiction from Genesis to Revelation. The foundations of many generations, back to paradise, patriarchal, law, gospel. Now we're in grace, looking forward to the appearing of Revelation 6th administration, and then a restoration, and even to a greater degree, the 7th administration of paradise, the divine on the earthly level, also the third divine completeness at heaven and earth, the third heaven and earth, the foundations of many generations. And thou shalt be called. Can there be any greater compliment spiritually to any man or woman standing today? No. The repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. That's what you're in the middle of right now. Your breaches are being repaired, the breaks, the gaps, the deteriorations, the untempered mortar that you've tried to build the walls of your mind with, that were nothing but whitewash, nothing but Pharisaic, Sadducee, Herodian whitewash, good for nothing when the pressure hits. Dr. Werble said in Power for Abundant Living, he wanted this word to be for us a firm rock in the sea of speculation, a safe anchorage in the vast ocean of doubt. And carrying that analogy, that allegory, carrying that metaphor into allegory, I've often referred to our remnant as a great archipelago, a scattering of islands over a great expanse of the salted seas of death. Archipelago. We are the islands of solidarity. On each of our islands we have lighthouses shining the light to those lost, struggling to get out of that sea of speculation, that vast ocean of doubt, and find themselves safe anchorage, find themselves a firm rock. We are the repairer of these breaches, the restorer. Restore means it's been stolen from you. You have the word stolen from you. The remnant is the escaped to more worthy endeavors, the healed, the made whole, the brought back. Your paths are being restored. And you that in your humility of heart see that, you're the ones that are right there with me. Well, the rest is great too. Tells us to, verse 14, I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth. I love that one. But let's get to Genesis finally and see how far we can go here. Genesis 42. Now when Jacob saw, that's the father, that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his sons, why do you look one upon another? What are you standing around gapping at each other for? My dad had a great line. What are you standing there with your teeth in your mouth? Meaning, snap out of it. Get busy. Let's get to work. All those sons mesmerized by the famine. Well, they were still out of fellowship. Jacob wasn't. Jacob was lied to. But he wasn't out of fellowship with God. He at least had the common sense as Jacob, representing the fundamental discipline in his life, to look around and say, hey, we're running out of food, you knuckleheads. What are you standing around staring at each other for with your teeth in your mouth? And he said, behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Well, at least he's had his ear to the ground paying attention. Get you down thither and buy for us from thence, that we may live and not die. That's a figure of speech, pleonasm, to repeat it to make sure they don't miss it. These dudes were so dull of wit, so nearly given up in their thought, he had to emphasize it, that we may live, and by the way, not die. Do you get it? Wake up! You know, it's interesting, this great prophecy that he uttered over Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, born of the Egyptian maid in Egypt, and yet those two took over the tribes of Reuben, and one record indicates Simeon also in the great taking of the promised land. You know, Manasseh, in verse 51 of the previous chapter, Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God said, he hath made me forget all my toil, see, and all my father's house. It was in honor of the father that he named his son Manasseh. And the name of the second called he Ephraim, for God hath caused me to be fruitful, that's Ephraim, in the land of my affliction. How's that for Isaiah 58? That we will abound and satisfy our souls in drought, make fat thy bones. See, the name of that son in honor of the true God, fruitful in the land of my affliction. That's the remnant. We are fruitful in this land of spiritual blight, spiritual leprosy, spiritual black plague all over the world. The ignorance, the idolatry, the adamancy, the obduracy against our wonderful Jehovah Elohim, and most especially in those that talk like they love the same God we love. They don't. They're just loving the adversary, disguising himself in a few fancy Bible names. Corn in Egypt represents abundance, so you go get it. Go get it. And Joseph's 10 brethren went down to buy corn in Egypt. Well, at least they could do what their head of their family said. So, see, they weren't completely deteriorated. At least they had enough sense and enough love for Jacob, renamed Israel, their patriarch, head of their clan, to obey him. But Benjamin, Joseph's brother, see, Joseph and Benjamin were born of Rachel. Joseph was older than Benjamin. Rachel then died in birthing Benjamin. And I've often thought and shared even, the word tells us she stole 2 idols from her father's house when Jacob gathered his wives, Rachel and Leah, and all their property and headed back to the land of Canaan. And I believe it has to be the spirits that came with those idols that killed Rachel in childbirth. There's no other explanation. Leah is the one that birthed the first 6 sons, including Judah, out of whom comes Jesus Christ. Well, but Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not with his brethren, for he said, lest peradventure evil befall him. See, he still had this fear in his mind. And it's a protective one after what happened to Joseph. And the sons of Israel came to buy corn among those that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. See, so that tells you 7 years of plenty and at least a year or two of famine had taken place before they head for Egypt and reconnect with their brother, who they don't, of course, recognize right away. Another indication of how out of alignment and harmony they were. And Joseph was the governor over the land. And he it was that sold, we make that point from the previous chapter in verse 57, and all countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn. Verse 56, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians. He didn't give it away. Sense knowledge-wise, that's giveaway seems to be a loving act, but it's not. It basically fosters selfishness. It fosters, what's that word they use, entitlement. It fosters slothfulness. To invest something. What you sow, you reap. A sowing. If they can't afford it in money, they can do it in natural resources. Any country we've given things to over the years should be giving us back, paying us in their natural resources. That's for sure. But people don't want to pay attention to the word. They just want to knee-jerk. The seed of the serpent, men and women behind these terrible decisions know that it's just bringing more chaos and hatred and travesty. The ones being manipulated think they're doing a charitable thing, but they're all stupider than stupid. And Paul says, if any man be ignorant, let him be ignored. So I ignore them unless I have the joy of confronting them. I sure have the joy of teaching you that have sound minds. They invested something to receive something back. That's the only way you get the true profit and result in any category, of body, soul, and spirit. There must be an honest, godly investment of goods or services or both. Sharing fully. Even in the unbelieving world. It allowed them to survive. They gave of something. Joseph was the governor over the land, and he it was that sold to all the people of the land. Revelation. God told him to do it that way, so he did it. The Lord shall guide him continually. He needed help. How do I administer this, Father? You're the one that gave me the guidance to interpret the visions of Pharaoh properly. Now, help me in the practical category. He knew his Lord would be right there with him with that Spirit of God working. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. They had enough sense to humble themselves. And Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them. He knew them. And yet, you know, a sense knowledge reaction was, he should have made himself known, right? Oh, the homecoming. No. God knew their hearts weren't ready. God knew there had to be some things happen. There had to be some changes of heart. Maybe their obeying of Jacob to head for Egypt was the first step. Yes, I think it was. Absolutely. But they had a ways to go. They had months and months and months to go before their forgiveness and restoration to alignment and harmony was complete. You talk about the mercy of God covering for people out there in hog country, walking in the misty flats, Dr. Earl used to call it, the swamplands of hard-heartedness and unbelief. Only the merciful prayers of the righteous protect people long enough until they wake up and return to the restorer of the paths. Return to him who's healing the breaches in their lives. He made himself strange unto them. Revelation. Probably just in spirit action. I don't know that he knew they were coming, but as soon as he saw them, he recognized them. Well, by rights then, they should have recognized him. Even sense knowledge-wise, their eyes were so blinded. and in the depth of their hearts they had this grating, nauseous, rending, gangrenous guilt chewing them up. They have a saying in the world, he's too much in his own head. Here's an example. They're in their own head. They're wallowing in their old nature. How many alibis, how much rationale, how many excuses have they layered over and over and over for 20 years at least? How many have they layered over to rationalize themselves through a day? How much wine did they have to drink at night before they could go to sleep? Boy, how many bad dreams did they have? A lot. That's where the dreams come from. An unresolved old nature. Many of them. Some of them is just activity of life that your mind's working through. I understand. It's not all evil necessarily, but it's trash to be taken out. I got to look at the trash bag, fill it up, pull the bag out, tie it together, walk it downstairs, put it in the garage in a little cart we have. Then Deb does the great burnt sacrifices through the week, goes out and burns it. Burnt offerings. Look at this. His immediate response, he talked about the Lord working continually. His light rising in obscurity, made himself strange unto them, and spake roughly. Bullinger says, now, this note, to me, put it all together. I had my inklings and had my thoughts moving in the direction of what I've told you, but it's this note from Bullinger. It nailed it for me, and I knew I was on the right track as to why all this back and forth, all this rigmarole, all this hiding things in their bags. I couldn't quite put my handle on it over the years, but in these last few weeks I began to see that was a necessity for them to recover themselves out of the snare of the devil. It took all that until finally they came full go to humility, and God could forgive them and Joseph could reveal himself to them. But this note, on verse 7, under the word roughly, in the great companion Bible, Dr. E.W. Bullinger, here it is. Each step in Joseph's treatment must be noted, all tending to one end, that is, to bring them back to that pit at Dothan, convict them of their sin, and compel their confession of it. That climax is not reached till verse 21. Now I would add, in part, Judah's words voice it in chapters 44 to 18 to 34, which, if I can move through here quick enough, we'll get to in the next whatever. That magnificent note just electrified me. Went off. I went ballistic. Because this, I was 95% there, and then this sealed it for me. See? It's not always a note from the companion Bible that puts me over the top. That's how God works. Sometimes it's not even a note. Sometimes it's just a thought. He lays it on me in prayer. Or an experience in life. I gnosko, understand something that helps me see something in the Word. At times it is. I pick up a companion Bible, an Amplified Bible, a Lamsa Bible. I read Lamsa's Old Testament Light. I look at the Bible dictionary. It's a joy. It's an adventure. I don't always know where the gemstone, the diamond on the velvet couch, will be discovered. Or like I wrote in my volume 1, the rubies set in ivory. Spake roughly unto them. Now you say, is Joseph acting? Is he play act? No, that's how he felt. Spiritually, yes. Emotionally, as a man, he would have been thrilled. He loved his brothers. He wanted to be reunited with them, but look how he controlled his mind. This is a fast. He didn't do the body, soul, comfort thing. He said, hey, I'm Joseph. I'm the big boss here. I'm the top cheese. You're all in good shape. Here, give me a hug. He would have wanted that, which eventually he gets it. But he knew spiritually it wasn't right yet. Sure, he spoke roughly to them, and it was authentic. There's no play acting in here. Revelation is not play acting. He spake roughly unto them. And he said unto them, whence come ye? And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. I'm sure very obsequiously. And Joseph knew his brethren. And I think that indicates much deeper than he recognized them physically. He knew spiritually these guys were in trouble. In the Gospels it says Jesus knew their thoughts, and it's always in the category of discerning of spirits. He knew his brethren. He knew they were still messed up spiritually. Whatever God showed him, he just knew it. Sometimes you don't even recognize the means whereby you knew, but it always comes through see, taste, touch, smell, or hear in the inner nature. But it's just like in senses life. You don't always stop and think about the means of how you recognize something in life. The key is that you recognize it and know it. He just knew, as God worked in him to will and to do of his good pleasure. But they knew not him. They had no spiritual discernment. That's the depth of that. They had no spiritual discernment as to the greatness of this man that stood before him, as to the debt they owed him, as to the heinous crime they had committed against him. They had no awareness of it whatsoever. Sounds like most people I've had to walk away from in my life. Same with many of you. Had no cognizance of it. Joseph was fighting for their lives. He was standing in the breach. He knew they needed spiritual restoration. Do you see it? All right, we better stop there for our 15 minutes. Maybe you'll come back and see what else is coming up, huh? I bet you do. Bless you hot. Chapter 42 of Genesis. In verse 8, and Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew not him. You see, it's the Word of God. You got to look beyond just the senses. Recognition. It isn't simply a physical recognition. Spirit, especially, look at the source. Consider the source. We're talking about Joseph knowing. Now, if it's some sense knowledge guy or one of the other 10 brothers, it might just be a senses recognition. But Joseph, when the word says he knew his brethren, he knew at least enough to know these guys were in deep spiritual trouble. They had not come to grips with their sin. Verse 9, and Joseph remembered the dreams or the visions which he envisioned of them. He didn't speak it forth again, though, did he? That would have given his identity away. That's a word of wisdom. Father reminded him of the vision from 20 years previous, that they would all bow down to him. And I'm sure later he reflected upon that, thanking God for the fulfillment of the revelation. But he knew not to utter it at this time, which he did originally when he was 17. He told them. You just see, every truth must fit in the framework of the manifestations. That's always such a great thing to stop and remind ourselves of when you get stumped on a record. Many times that just clarifies things. Even records that appear to be contradictory, to remind yourself of revelation at work and impartation in the Old Testament here. Revelation and impartation. Revelation, word of wisdom, word of knowledge, discerning of spirits. Discerning of spirits is word of wisdom and word of knowledge in the spirit realm. That's what he would have operated when he knew his brethren. He knew them spiritually, that he saw the trouble they were still in. The alibi, the rationale, they had not come to grips with their sin against him, among other things. Then, from revelation, you operate the manifestation of believing with the word of wisdom you're given to take action, expecting to see results of either energizing of an instantaneous miracle or gifts of healings. That's how it works. 6 manifestations, the human number under the law that they operated. And Grace Administration added 3. See, any prophecy they spoke before Pentecost was by revelation. It wasn't the inspirational unique category that's carried with us that speak in tongues, interpret tongues, and what's called prophesy from inspiration, not revelation, to edify by way of exhortation and comfort. All the prophecy up to the day of Pentecost was by revelation. That's right. So that's how you make that distinction. He remembered the visions. God reminds him of that going on in his mind. See, this is what you call an omnipotent narrator. Holy men of God spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit, the giver. We know Joseph's thoughts. We know what God's telling Joseph. We know the treacherous thoughts of others, like the brothers. Because the Father is the searcher of all what? Hearts. And so even though sense knowledge-wise, Joseph, as soon as he saw them, would have wanted to reveal himself, look at the discipline. Look at the restraint. Look at the in-depth spiritual perception and awareness to know the time wasn't right. And then Father in verse 8 shows him why it wasn't right. He knew his brethren, and I think at that point he knew what he was in for. He had a piece of work to carry out that was going to take months, but it was absolutely necessary to bring his brothers back to full deliverance. I believe he knew that right there, and he knew it was going to happen. Therefore, later when it says he wept, it's like when Jesus wept at Lazarus' tomb. He wept out of joy because he saw the revelation coming to pass that his brothers would be delivered, like Jesus wept for joy because he had already had the revelation that he would raise Lazarus from the dead. That's another one they wrongly divide all the time, from John chapter 11. And he says to them, you are spies to see the nakedness. Nakedness is the vulnerability of the land you are come. And they said unto him, nay, my Lord, but to buy food are thy servants come. We are all one man's sons. Watch this. We are true men. Thy servants are no spies. Look at this phrase, true men. This is what Joseph and God working in him is endeavoring to bring his brothers back to being. They say we are true men. Joseph knew they weren't yet. Look at verse 19. If ye be what? True men. Let one of your brethren be bound in the house, etc. Look at verse 31. And we said unto him, we are true men. Verse 33. And the man, the Lord of the country, said unto us, hereby shall I know that you are what? True men. Look at verse 34. And bring your youngest brother unto me, then shall I know that ye are no spies, but that you are true men. See, it's a process of proving. By revelation, he's giving them these little tasks. They're not little, but they're tasks to carry out, which would indicate whether they were true men. And I'm not sure that accusing them of spies wasn't spiritually right on, because spiritually they were still infected. And even though in their consciousness, that part of their minds that they controlled, they didn't see themselves as spies, the spirits that were moving in and out of their minds we're certainly spying out the land. How about that, sports fans? Every truth must fit in the framework of the manifestations, and especially discerning of spirits, which Christian ministers and believers today are the most ignorant of and refuse to acknowledge the necessity of. So how many of those true men things? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's what I do. There may be more. 6 times that phrase, true men. 6, the human number. Something going on here, folks. We are true men. Back to verse 11. Thy servants are no spies. And he said unto them, Nay, but to see the vulnerability of the land you are come. He said it again. So that, I hadn't thought of that till right now, but I made the point earlier that Joseph is not play acting. So therefore, he didn't just make this accusation up. He saw how spiritually infected these men were, and therefore they are spies of evil. I think I'm right, and I think it's the fact that he repeats it, and he again repeats it, that this must be considered in light of discerning of spirits. Tough thing for him to see about his own brothers, but by golly, that's what he saw. And they said, Thy servants are 12 brethren, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. He said 12. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is not. That's all he said. Well, that's a lie, isn't it? He didn't know he was lying. Maybe he did. He wasn't for sure Joseph had died. For all they knew, he was alive because they sold him into slavery. So he is lying. What's the old thing in politics? CYA, cover your ass. I'm not sure how that'll translate into French, but my men will figure it out. And women. Cover your bohunkus, your behind, your keister. That's a lie. And he says it right to the face of the man that's standing there. Wow. You think Joseph might have wanted to say something? You're lying. I'm right here. Nope. He controlled himself. I'm sure he had anger, wouldn't you? Had every right to be angry. That angry wasn't an act. That anger was not method acting. It was authentic anger, energized to the Spirit of God. He had a right to his spiritual vengeance. He had a right to believe God's revelation to restore his brothers to alignment and harmony with Jehovah Elohim so that God's purposes could be carried out in years to come. Verse 14. And Joseph said unto them, he would have had sorrow also, but you'll see that too. And Joseph said unto them, That is it that I spake unto you, saying, You are spies. 3rd time. Okay, folks, I think there's a treasure that's emerged out of darkness, a light that's arisen out of obscurity, like Isaiah 58. No question this is discerning of spirits. He's referencing the spirit spies that have inhabited these men. Hereby ye shall be proved, and here the process must continue. This is the proving. Remember, Jesus Christ did this. Paul did this with his men, training them. Jesus Christ turned on them and said, How shall we feed this multitude? And they answered, We only have a young lad with loaves and fishes. They were checking out. He was checking out their believing. Were they willing to believe God for the miracle required to feed the multitude of the 4,000 and the 7,000? He turned to them at one time and said, Who do men say that I am? And they give him an answer. Some say you're Elijah. Some say you're John the Baptist. And he says, Well, who do you say that I am? See? He wanted to know right from their own lips. And in this case, Peter did answer correctly, Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus said, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonas, for flesh and blood hath not revealed this unto you, but my Father which is in heaven. That tells you Peter had the Spirit and had the revelation. Later, Jesus has to wheel on him and say, "Get thee behind me, Satan, for thou savorest not the things of God, but the things of men." Well, that's the human side of things. Sometimes flip in and out. All those gospel records come to mind as I read this. "Hereby ye shall be proved. By the life of Pharaoh ye shall not go forth hence, except your youngest brother come here, Benjamin. Send one of you, and let him fetch your brother. And ye shall be kept in prison, that your words may be proved whether there be any truth in you. Or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." Well, that's the fourth time. "And he put them all together into ward 3 days, put them in prison, all by revelation." Now, he didn't torture them. He didn't treat them cruelly. All their needs were met. You don't read all that into all the dumbass prison movies you've seen. Verse 18, "And Joseph said unto them the third day," let them stew on it, think about it, "This do and live, for I respect Elohim." Look what he revealed. I respect Elohim. They think he's an Egyptian. Look at the hint here. Elohim, Jehovah Elohim, is the God of the Hebrews. The whole world knows that, the God of the Hebrews. Might that not have given them a hint? But there's no indication. "If you be true men, let one of your brethren be bound in the house of your prison." Circumstances change, revelation changes. "Now I'll keep one, and the rest of you go." Look at the flexibility and the Lord guiding Joseph continually. "Go ye, carry corn for the famine of your houses." Look at the loving gesture there. I'm giving you your provender, giving you the resources. "But bring your youngest brother unto me." He had to be convinced that Benjamin was still alive. "So shall your words be verified." They lied about him. One is not. He had to be convinced. "And ye shall not die." Pretty serious, huh? And they did so. And they said one to another, watch this, here it is. Here's what Bullinger mentioned. "We are verily guilty concerning our brother." Brings tears to your eyes. Hey, look at that. 3 days stewing in a prison cell. I bet they were thinking, talking, maybe even praying. And they finally are willing to bring to the surface what they've bitten their tongues on for over 20 years. "We are verily guilty concerning our brother." Bullinger's great note, guilty. The treatment begins to take effect. You see, this wasn't just Joseph playing with them, torturing them, wasting his time back and forth. This is a process of bringing people to humility. People need this help at times. They need to be brought to a full awareness, consciously, of where their broken fellowship happened. Recognize it, admit it honestly before the Father. I don't know through all here that they ever said something like that directly to Joseph. But Joseph knew spiritually, eventually, that they had humbled themselves before the Lord, and that's the key. I don't always need people directly apologizing to me. I can see the fruit of their life by their response to what I'm doing now. I don't necessarily need that. There might be rare occasions, but Joseph, I don't see them ever saying anything that direct. "Joseph, we're so sorry we did that to you." Now, there's so many details in here. Maybe they did. And if they did, I'm glad to get to it. But right now, I don't remember it. They never quite, and they didn't have to. Look what you learn about forgiveness. The key is, are people honest before the Father? Oh, they did say that. Oh no, look what it is in chapter 50. Look at this. This is around the time that Jacob, Israel, dies. Verse 15, and when Joseph's brethren saw that their father was dead, they said, Joseph will peradventure hate us, and will certainly requite us all the evil which we did unto him. Wow, they still got fear. They still got tendencies of guilt. See, it's a process. Verse 21 of chapter 42 is a great breakthrough. But here we are in chapter 50, and they're still not completely healed, are they? Look at the process of healing required. The deeper the sin went, the years that it lasted. Look at the stepping stones to full resolve. Wow. And they sent a messenger unto Joseph, saying, Thy father, Israel, did command before he died, saying, So shall ye say unto Joseph, Forgive, I beg of thee now, the trespass of thy brethren, and their sin. For they did unto thee evil, and now we pray thee, forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of thy father. And Joseph wept when they spake unto him. You know, I think that's true, or Joseph would have known. They didn't just make up that story because they were afraid. Joseph's response indicates it was authentic. And look how it took. Look at this man of God, Jacob, Israel. Not only did he deliver magnificent prophecy on his deathbed over the 12 sons, can you imagine the strength and the cognizance and the control of your mind that's necessary to do that right before he falls asleep? But he is the one who interceded. He who next to Joseph himself was wronged and harmed greater than anyone, because he lived for years with that sorrow that his great son Joseph had been devoured of wild beasts. Look at his heart. He told the brethren to pass this on to Joseph. I'd like to believe they didn't make that up. Anyway, because Joseph's response is so authentic. Joseph wept, and those have to be tears of joy, because he's been working for months and months to get these guys straight. Had to wait on their free will. He's been doing all he could for them. And his brethren also went and fell down before his face, and they said, Behold, we be thy servants. And in other words, they offered themselves to indentured slavery, if that's what Joseph required. That's their humility. And Joseph said unto them, Fear not, for am I in the place of Elohim? But as for you, you thought, or this is the Greek word boulomai, you reasoned and plotted destructive evil, kakos, against me. That's what they did. But Elohim, boulomai, reasoned and thought it through unto the ideal, kalos. Boy, what a great companion verse to Romans 8:28. How about it? To bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive. Now therefore fear ye not, I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spake kindly unto them. And Joseph, that's what he wanted to do all along. And Joseph dwelled in Egypt in his father's house, and Joseph lived 110 years, and it goes on. But that's where it's heading, that great climactic event after the death of Jacob, Israel. Jacob, Israel, is the one who interceded for his sons before the great man of God, Joseph. He knew Joseph would be the greatest, and he shows himself through here. Well, let's see. Let's pick up some more details. We were stopped in verse 21 when they indicate their first indication of humility. In 42:22, and Reuben, that's the eldest, answered them, saying, Spake I not unto you, saying, Do not sin against the child? And you would not hear? Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. Now, whether this is an I told you so sort of cover, or whether there's some authenticity. When in doubt, why not be positive? Dr. World taught me that time after time. Why not give Reuben the benefit? Although we know Reuben had already failed his father and his portion would be taken from him, let's just give him the benefit of the doubt, unless there's something different that comes up. And they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spake unto them by an interpreter. See, they still thought he was an Egyptian man. He understood every word they were saying. And he turned himself about from them and wept. Why? Out of joy. They were waking up. Like Jesus wept because he had revelation to raise Lazarus. They say he wept because he was sorrowful. No, that was the religious leaders that interpreted his weeping that way. And they're always wrong. Just like today. He wept out of joy. Love that. And returned to them again. And communed with them, fellowship, talked with them. And took from them Simeon and bound him before their eyes. Well, he had things to do. Now, Bullinger has a note here. Simeon, probably because his cruel nature made him the deviser of the evil. Well, it's a logical thought. You know, Simeon and Levi, in chapter 49 of Jacob's deathbed prophecy, verse 5, Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou into their secret, which means their counsel. Unto their ecclesia, mine honor, be not thou united. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will, not by God's guidance, they digged down a wall. That means they destroyed. They wiped out a whole city. And you can read of that in Genesis 34. They did have a cause to react, but God interceded for the people involved. Jacob gave his okay to forgive them, and Simeon and Levi, out of self-will, self-anger, wiped out the whole city, killed all the men. Now, Levi truly must have recovered, because out of Levi came the Levitical priesthood, including the high priest, the first one being Aaron. So Levi's bloodline recovered. Simeon, there are some that indicate that Ephraim and Manasseh took the portions of Reuben and Simeon. Although 1 Chronicles 5:1 that we read last week only speaks of Reuben. But there is others that indicate Simeon was replaced, which makes some sense based on things, but we'll see. And he turned himself about from them and wept, and returned to them again and communed with them, and took from them Simeon and bound him before their eyes. Then Joseph commanded to fill their sacks with corn, and to restore every man's money into his sack, and to give them provision for the way, and thus did he unto them. That's Ephesians 3:20 in an Old Testament manner. An abundance, a superabundance, and they laded their asses with the corn and departed thence. And as one of them opened his sack to give his ass provender in the end, he espied his money. For behold, it was in his sack's mouth, and he said unto his brethren, My money is restored, and lo, it is even in my sack. And their heart failed them, and they were afraid, saying one to another. Let's see, Bullinger has a note on failed. Failed them, went out. Okay, hyperbole. So in other words, figuratively, they didn't drop dead, but their believing heart. What is this that, look at that, God hath done unto us? All right. They have humbled, but there's a healing process going on. This is still proving them. They very readily could have already recognized Joseph. He said he respected Elohim. Other indications of it. One of them could have said, hold on here, guys. Maybe he gave us this. God's blessing us. Oh, you see, they all went back to the consequential. Why not? Because this is the way they'd been thinking for over 20 years. Every time something happened, it was an indication of God's disfavor. They were terrified, living in fear. So it takes time for people to climb out of, even when they finally admitted their error. We see that in Genesis 50. They're still terrified. And yet, Jacob, God in his providence, gave him the revelation that would bring it to a full healing to continue in their lives after the death of their father. A lot going on here, wouldn't you say? What is this that God hath done unto us? Well, that's just a reflection still of their residual guilt. Verse 29, and they came unto Jacob their father, unto the land of Canaan, and told him all that befell unto them, saying, the man who is the Lord of the land spake roughly, adamantly to us, and took us for spies of the country. And we said unto him, we are true men. We are no spies. We be 12 brethren, sons of our father. One is not. Let's quickly pass that by. And the youngest is this day with our father in the land of Canaan. They still would not tell their father the truth of what happened. They just said one is not. So see, all this residual guilt takes time to overcome. There's still lying going on. And the man, the Lord of the country, said unto us, hereby shall I know that you are true men. Well, they quoted him right. Leave one of your brethren here with me and take food for the famine of your household and be gone. He still provided for them. And bring your youngest brother unto me, then shall I know that you are not spies, but that you are true men. I think spiritually that means as soon as they mustered up the gumption, the believing, the courage to obey that command and bring Benjamin and protect him safely all the way back to Egypt, that those spirits would be gone and that they would indeed be living up to what they called themselves, true men. Wow. This reminds me a couple of times over the years, Dr. Wirble shared with us that he gets letters from people alibying and rationalizing for mistakes they've made, trying to give him all the conditions, all the circumstances in their long, windy letters. I had to learn this myself over the years. Confronted people, did my best to show them the word, correct them, and then give back a letter of alibis. And he said he wished he had a rubber stamp that he could just stamp on the letter and send back to him. The stamp would say, not sufficiently redemptive. See, all those excuses, all these alibis. You see honesty and then you see dishonesty. You see humility and then still you see guilt and fear. This is people. Look at the greatness of our God, never violating their free will, waiting on them to grow, by mercy protecting them. Because there was a man of God named Joseph standing in the gap. There is a remnant of Joseph standing in the gap for what I believe still are many who God sees in their hearts they should return and would return and can return to what we call the remnant of Joseph. And it's our prayers and our stand that keeps that door open. Every individual case is their decision. Many are called, few are chosen is still a ruling, prevailing truth. Likewise with our remnant. And it came to pass as they emptied their sacks that, behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when both they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid, instead of being thankful. And Jacob their father said unto them, Ye have ye bereaved of my children. Joseph is not, and Simeon is not, and ye will take Benjamin away? All these things are against me. And Reuben spake unto his father, saying, Slay my 2 sons, if I bring him not to thee. Deliver him into my hand, and I will bring him to thee again. Well, yeah, that's something Jacob would like. Yeah, 2 more of his grandsons. Sort of an emotional response there. Perhaps it indicates Reuben's commitment. It may. Otherwise, he's not providing any comfort to Israel saying that. That's for sure. And he said, My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead. See, they still hadn't fessed up to Jacob, had they? And he is left alone. If mischief, which is evil, befall him by the way in the which ye go, then shall ye bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. It would kill me if Benjamin was lost as well. And the famine was sore in the land. See, they're into the years of famine now. And it came to pass when they had eaten up the corn which they had brought out of Egypt, their father said unto them, Go again, buy us a little food. And Jacob spake unto him, Judah. Now this to me indicates Judah is getting it together. Who knows how many months passed from that conversation to this decision? But it's right there on Judah's mind to obey the words spoken by Joseph, who he didn't know yet, but he took it as authority. I think this speaks highly of Judah, that his heart is recovering. And Judah spake unto him, saying, The man did solemnly protest unto us, saying, Ye shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. If thou wilt send our brother with us, we will go down and buy thee food. But if thou wilt not send him, we will not go down. For the man said unto us, Ye shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. And now it says Israel. Sometimes it calls him Jacob, sometimes Israel. Israel means he who prevails with God, with El, the omnipotent. And Israel said, Wherefore dealt ye so ill or evil with me, as to tell the man whether you had yet a brother? Interesting conversation here. Why'd you even tell him? And they said, The man asked us straightly of our state, our situation, and of our kindred, saying, Is your father yet alive? Have ye another brother? Boy, even that could have indicated something to them about who was asking. They still have guilt and the blindness associated with it, at least in part. And we told him according to the tenor of these words. Could we certainly know that he would say, Bring your brother down? And Judah said unto Israel his father, Send the lad with me. See, I believe this is a godly, inspired utterance. I think Reuben was clutching for straws, was angry and hurt. You know, who would offer his own 2 sons if the father's other son got killed? That wouldn't be any comfort to anybody. I believe this is an authentic statement. Send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die. Now he's saying back to his father what he had had to say to them years ago. Both we and thou, and also our little ones. I will be surety. I will be the guarantee for him. See, this makes more sense than Reuben's off the cuff anger to offer his 2 sons. You know, Judah offered himself. He would be indentured for Benjamin. Of my hand shalt thou require him, if I bring him not unto thee, and set him before thee. Then let me bear the blame, watch this, forever. Hey, this is Judah. Out of Judah came the Christ. would not this have contaminated the bloodline that God in his foreknowledge wanted for the Lord Jesus Christ? This would be a curse on the bloodline. Let me bear the blame. And that's like, I'll bear the curse forever. I think the key here is there's nothing greater that Judah could have offered. Reuben's fell short. This is a most authentic giving of oneself. This is a fast to be reckoned with. This is a fast, a giving of oneself to draw out one's soul. This is a fasting worth its salt. No way Jehovah Elohim's going to let Judah's bloodline be cursed to contaminate his plans for the positive genes, the positive DNA, the positive genetic structure of the greatest man ever born unto woman, Jesus Christ. Wow, you see a lot going on there? See what I mean? I don't know how long it's going to take for us to get through all this, but I just feel like Father's given us an open door of utterance. I just don't want to shortchange it. I've wanted to teach this record for years. I told Deb at break, I remember sitting in my little apartment in Toledo, who knows how many years ago, reading this record, just boiling over with emotion, wishing I could teach it to somebody. Well, it's been a few, so I'm not going to rush it, and we'll take the time we need, because we're seeing things even here. I've been over and over this, and Father's showing me stuff I never saw before, like all that revelation on spies and how accurate spiritually that was. And the key was, when it hit my mind deeply, that Joseph is not play acting. He's not just making stuff up, which commentators accuse him of. This is all on the money, on the mark. He's a true man. His brothers want to be true men. He is setting before them challenges to overcome that will bring them back to the status of a true, godly, believing man. Judah indicates he's well on his way. That's one of the great commitments right there in verses 8 and 9. That is authentic. Thank the Lord. For except we had lingered, surely now we had returned this second time. And their father Israel said unto them, see, it convinced him. I believe in Israel's heart spiritually he saw, this is on the money. This is what I wanted out of this young man. He's a man. He's got his own clan, his own family, his own children, his own properties. He's a grown man. But I've been waiting for this man to rise up to this caliber spirit, so I believe Israel recognized it. And their father Israel said unto them, if it must be so now, do this. He didn't say that to Reuben's crazy commitment. It must be so now, do this. Take of the best fruits in the land in your vessels, and this is Eastern culture. You take a gift to a man of status, and carry down the man a present, a little balm, and a little honey, spices and myrrh, nuts and almonds. I think Bishop Pillai taught us 3 categories in the East where you always took a gift: a pregnant woman, a man of God or a prophet, and I forgot, must have been a wedding ceremony or something. Or a man of even a great political status, you would take along something. Watch this, and take double money in your hand. And the money that was brought again in the mouth of your sacks, carry it again in your hand. Peradventure it was an oversight. Take also your brother, and arise, go again unto the man. And watch this great prophecy by revelation. And that's how it would have comforted Israel. And God Almighty give you mercy. Little did he know how big they needed mercy. Can you dig it? God Almighty is El Shaddai, the bountiful God who supplies all our need. El Shaddai. It's there in the Bullinger note. Give you mercy, and here it's mercy. the withholding of deserved wrath. They had been living under mercy for over 20 years, and they needed a little more, maybe a lot more, before the man, that he may send away your other brother and Benjamin. If I be bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. He readied himself not to wither, even if this terrible thing happened. But with all his heart, he spoke by revelation that El Shaddai would give them mercy. He must have known something had been screwy. Sure he did. He just didn't know what, because they never honestly told him what happened to Joseph. Apparently neither did God. You know, in working the Dale Carnegie books, there's a great book he wrote called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. We read those many times in the Corps because they were very practical, and we documented every principle with Scripture. But there's a great one in there. In some situations that are so intensely dire, D-I-R-E, the greatest way to overcome the anxiety is just say to yourself, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? Be honest, and then prepare yourself to deal with that. What's the worst that could happen? And then say, all right, then I'll deal with it. I'll keep living. And that is a great key to releasing anxiety. And then, of course, especially in our believing realm, for the most part, the worst does not happen. It all works together unto good. But that's a great little key. That's what he's doing right here. He's preparing himself for the worst, and yet believing for the best, and giving the blessing of El Shaddai. And the men took that present, and they took double money in their hand and Benjamin, and rose up and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. And when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the ruler of his house, bring these men home, and slay and make ready, for these men shall dine with me at noon. That was his immediate spiritual response. And the man did as Joseph bade. And the man brought the men into Joseph's house. And the men were afraid, because they were brought into Joseph's house. And they said, because of the money that was returned in our sacks at the first time, are we brought in, that we may seek occasion, that he may seek occasion against us, and fall upon us, and take us for bondmen, and our asses, our property. And then they finally make a good decision here. They dealt with that fear. They came near to the steward of Joseph's house, and they communed with him at the door of the house. That shows they're growing. Yes, they were still afraid. As before, it paralyzed them, it froze them. Now they're acting to try to absolve it, assuage it, and said, oh, sir, the steward of the house, they knows what goes on. We came indeed down at the first time to buy food. And it came to pass when we came to the inn that we opened our sacks, and behold, every man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. And we have brought it again in our hand, and other money have we brought down in our hands to buy food. We cannot tell who put our money in our sacks. And he said, peace be to you, fear not. Your Elohim and the Elohim of your father hath given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money. And he brought Simeon out unto them. Wouldn't you say they made a good decision? They sought counsel honestly. They said, we're afraid what has happened to us. We're afraid of what will happen. Do you know what happened? That indicates they're growing. Look at that. They're finally making good decisions. Judah's wonderful proclamation to his father. Right on the money. What they said in verses 21 and 22, previous chapter, got them started. Well, what got them started was obeying Jacob in the first place to head for Egypt. And the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet, and he gave their asses provender. And they made ready the present against Joseph, came at noon. For they heard that they should eat bread there. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house, and bowed themselves to him to the earth. And he asked them of their welfare. Wow, he's not speaking roughly now. And said, Is your father well? The old man of whom you spake, is he yet alive? See, he didn't know. And they answered, Thy servant, our father, is in good health. He is yet alive. And they bowed down their heads and made obeisance. And he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his, Rachel's, mother's son, and said, Is this your younger brother of whom you spake unto me? And he said, God be gracious unto thee, my son. The first thing he said, he uttered this magnificent revelation to bless Benjamin. And Joseph made haste, for his bowels did yearn upon his brother. Oh, my. And he sought where to weep. And he entered into his chamber and wept there. And he washed his face and went out and refrained himself and said, Set on bread. You know, you would think there he would reveal himself. But no, look at the discipline of this man over his own emotions. Can you imagine his heart welling up in him? He finally lays eyes on his own blood brother through his own mother by way of Jacob or Israel, the father. Look how he controlled his emotions. And, you know, this is every bit 1 Corinthians 10:13 as being delivered from trouble. Because what if he had allowed his emotions to overwhelm the revelation he was walking by, and he'd have jumped too soon and revealed himself? It would have broken the progress of their humility. Remember, there hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man, to humankind. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted above that you are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape also, that ye may be able to bear it. See, if he'd have responded to his emotion, now that's not to say at times emotions and spiritual guidance can be at one. Yes, they can. And I'll show you that here later. But in this case, no. He separated soul from spirit. Remember, the word divides asunder soul and spirit and the joints and the marrow. Soul, your personality, your emotions. Spirit, the Spirit of God, which is to be elevated above reason, which is elevated above the body. Wow. Look at this man. Boy, is he an example of that Isaiah 58? It would have been a combination of joy, maybe a little sorrow that it took so long, but mainly joy. And he washed his face and went out and refrained. Not only the joy of seeing Benjamin, but the joy to know that his brothers were being healed, that the humbleness and humility of their capacity of heart, they were willingly recovering themselves out of the snare of the devil. I quoted that one, didn't I? We better read that in 2 Timothy 2 so you don't miss this great theme. Isaiah 58 sets the tone of this Joseph record. 1 Corinthians 10:13, and then this one in 2 Timothy 2. Maybe it's 1 Timothy. Some of you know it, but I just can't seem to find it. But that it says they may recover themselves, and that's the great thing to recognize there, that they may recover themselves out of the snare of the devil. That's what it takes still, and that's what these guys were in the process of doing. And by God's mercy and grace, He's allowing them the time to do so, because there's so much at stake. You know, the history of humankind is at stake. Thought for sure that was in 2 Timothy. Well, some of you already know where it is, but you know the scripture I'm talking about. Recover themselves out of the snare of the devil. There it is, 2 Timothy 2, verse 26. Well, look at 25. In meekness, instructing those. See, meekness to God, meekness to His guidance, meekness to His revelations, meekness to His discernings, instructing those that oppose themselves, working against their own best interests. If God peradventure will give them repentance to the acknowledging, the recognizing of the truth, and that they then may recover themselves. See, no one can do it for anyone else. We can only help it along by revelation, like Joseph with his brothers, that they may recover themselves out of the snare, the trap of Diabolos, who are taken captive by him at his will. That's his craving, the thief, to capture and incarcerate. They are working their way out of that. Back to Genesis 43, and he washed his face and went out and refrained himself. Boy, look at the discipline. And said, set on bread. See, they ate salted meal with him. And they set on for him by himself, and for them by themselves, and for the Egyptians which did eat with him by themselves, because the Egyptians might not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination unto the Egyptians. And they sat before him the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men marveled one to another. They marveled because how would Joseph know their ages? This again could have revealed. Bullinger's great note here also, this was to try them and see whether they were still moved with envy, because he took and sent messes, which is, you know, it's a term for food and other abundance, unto them from before him, but Benjamin's mess was 5 times the number of grace, so much as any of theirs. But they showed no envy, no jealousy. This again, by their fruits ye shall know them. And they drank and were merry with him. It shows you their hearts are finally at rest. Look at the process of wholeness. Well, that's all the time we'll take. That gives you plenty to work. I've set the theme for you. You can pick out things as you read it. And I think we're just in one of the great times in our lives, in this remnant of Joseph, to be working this word together. So I'll see you again next Saturday, January 13th, 10 a.m. Eastern. God bless you. Thank you.